Cool. We'll get it rolling here this morning. Good morning, everyone. Today we are going over the inspection contingency timeframes. Obviously, that section of the agreement of sale, and then we're going to talk about the change in terms addendum, and get into some situations and how it works out. This is something that you really can't go over enough. Every situation's a little bit different, and it's always good to refresh this stuff and walk back through it. Kong's going to go through the agreement of sale here. He's got his screen shared. I'm going to hand it over to him, and we'll get started.
Sounds good. Thanks, Brooks. Everybody can see my screen. We're good.
Yep.
Yes. Yep.
So we've had some instances with the replied inspection, and it's not just the easy amount of days, who gets what, that type of deal. So we'll try to bring up some situations along the way that we've come up with and try to help you have a cleaner deal. So paragraph 12 starts the buyer's due diligence inspections, and paragraph A, subparagraph A, talks about the rights and responsibilities. So there's five things that has to that are rights and the responsibility of both the buyer and the seller. One, seller will provide access to insurers, representatives, and as may be required by this agreement or by mortgage lender, to surveyors, municipal officials, appraisers, and inspectors. In addition, unless otherwise agreed, only parties and their real estate licensee may attend any inspection. So this paragraph, number one, sets the tone that it says the seller is going to allow access to the property. Okay. And number two, who can attend? All right. So it doesn't say that your uncle who's not on the contract can attend and walk you through the house. Okay. So if anybody other than the people named in the contract and their inspector are showing up to this inspection, it's probably good practice to let the list agent know, hey, this person may be there. Is that okay? You know, that type of simple email. Number two, buyer may make two pre-settlement walkthrough inspections of the property for the limited purpose of determining that the condition of the property is as required by this agreement and any addenda. Buyer's right to the inspections is not waived by any other provision of this agreement. So, um, Brooks, this came up a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
Uh, does a home inspection, a septic inspection, count as one of these pre-settlement walkthroughs? And Brooks and I talked through it, and we kind of agree that no, they're not. Brooks, you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the last part of that sentence really is the giveaway, and it's not waived by any other provision of this agreement. So just because they may have waived the inspection contingencies, there's no contingencies in there. Again, that last part of that sentence says very clearly that it doesn't waive their right to those two pre-settlement walkthroughs. Now, it kind of defines in there that it's not a home inspection. It's simply to determine whether or not the property's still in the condition that was agreed upon via that agreement of sale. But again, there's no other provision within that contract that voids or waives their right to do two pre-settlement walkthroughs.
Correct. Okay.
Now, guys, before you go to the next point, I want to bring up something. We've had two particular cases within the last week of agents coming to me and talking to me about, after the home inspections and after the reply to inspections, agents were trying to put in the change in terms agreement that the buyers have the right to have contractors come in basically at any time to review and give estimates to for them. And, we've had sellers have resistance to that. So I think what some people are trying to do as a workaround on that is use one of those walkthroughs, one of those two walkthroughs, as their ability to bring in contractors to give them bids on the house and try to coordinate it all at one time. Do you think, Brooks and Kong, that is allowable or not allowable? Because again, now we're bringing people into the house that aren't party to the agreement of sale.
Right. Yeah,
Well,
no, I think that that's kind of gray area. And obviously, like you said, it applies to that first part, Conrad, that only parties to the agreement and their real estate licensees may attend inspections or walkthroughs. Um,
So again, if this is going to happen and you're involved in one of these situations where they want to bring a contractor through as part of the walkthrough process, we probably need to run that by the listing agent, right, Kong?
uh, correct. Let me try to pull something up here real quick while we're on here. So when all else fails, go to the guideline. All of these documents have guidelines, okay? So the guideline is probably 63 pages long for the 14-page agreement of sale, okay? So we had an issue this week with somebody talking about that they had a right to inspections. They called the pre-settlement walkthrough an actual inspection. And here's what the guidelines state about that portion, okay? The buyer, can you see my screen, by the way?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
It says the buyer reserves the right to make two pre-settlement inspection walkthrough of the property. The right to conduct these pre-settlement walkthrough inspection is not waived by the waiver or any other inspections or repair contingencies in the agreement. So that goes back to Brooks, what you were saying about, you know, this not counting as an inspection does not count as a walkthrough. A pre-settlement walkthrough is not meant to be a formal inspection of the property. Okay. So a formal inspection to me has a professional inspector. It is simply to allow the buyer to look around and make sure the property appears to be in the condition stated in the agreement, e.g., required repairs have been completed, appliances, fixtures have been left or moved as stated, right? The washer and dryer is still there, the fridge is still there. The buyer should not use this time as the time to measure for renovations, to bring in contractors, or take the extended family on a tour of the property. Okay, so sounds pretty clear to me.
Yeah. And you're saying, Kong, that's in the guideline
Yeah, it's in the
of,
guideline. I believe it's like page 12 of the guideline. So if anybody ever has a problem with this, another agent, just simply send them this from the guideline and just state, show me.
and is that in our PAR forms, the
Yes.
guideline? Okay,
Yep.
good to know.
Yeah, I just snippet this from that and gave it to our agent and said, just send this to the other agent.
Yeah, I think that's pretty clear. That answers the questions of what we've been faced with here recently.
Okay.
I mean, that doesn't mean you can't take contractors through if you don't get written, or you have to get written approval from the listing agent and the
Correct.
seller.
Yep. It just states that they don't have the right to.
Right.
Yep. All right. Number 3. This is actually important right around this time. Seller will have heating and all utilities, including fuel, on for all inspection appraisals. Okay. So if the property uses oil or propane and the tank is empty, the seller needs to provide something. Okay, so that you can test all the systems.
We've had, again, some situations within the past couple of weeks where, because of the weather that we have and their vacant homes, certain bathrooms and plumbing were shut off prior to these home inspectors going to inspect. And, these inspectors won't turn it on. So we need to make sure when we're getting ready to coordinate that inspection, we are communicating with the listing agent and asking them, is there fuel? Is there propane? Is there oil? Are all is the plumbing working to all the bathrooms? That type of thing.
Yeah.
And I know we shouldn't have to, but we need to, because people are showing up to do these inspections and we're not able to do them.
I just had a vacant house that was winterized uh, go up for sale, and the seller didn't want to really turn it on because he's like, this is going to cost me $500 the next 60 days. And I said to him, I'm going to make you $250,000 in the next 60 days. You can't afford $500 for the utilities, and he turned it back on. So,
Okay.
number 4, all inspectors, including home inspectors, are authorized by buyer to provide a copy of any inspection report to broker for buyer. Okay. Number 5, seller has the right, upon request, to receive a free copy of any inspection report from the party for whom it was prepared, unless otherwise stated. Seller does not have the right to receive a copy from any lender's appraisal report. So this paragraph is kind of important too, because we've had sellers ask for the appraisal report, right? But they already agreed in writing when they signed this contract that they're okay with getting a copy of the inspection report free, but that they're not entitled to a copy of the appraisal. Okay, so it's already written out for you. Subparagraph B, buyer waives or elects at buyer's expense to have the following inspections, certifications, and investigations, referred to as inspections or inspections, performed by professional contractors, home inspectors, engineers, architects, and other properly licensed or otherwise qualified professionals. All inspections shall be non-invasive unless otherwise agreed in writing. If the same inspector is inspecting more than one system, the inspector must comply with the home inspection law for notices regarding property and environmental inspections. Okay, so there you go. It outlines who can inspect the property. The otherwise qualified professionals kind of leaves the door open a little bit, but
By the way, your previous one, we've also had a couple cases here recently where buyers have done their inspections. In one particular case, the buyer walked away from the deal. We did not get a copy of the home inspection, put the property back on the market. Agent gets somebody that's interested in making an offer, knows that the property was under contract, knows that the buyer walked away as a basis of the home inspection, wanted to see if we could get a copy of it. Our seller, our agent was going to decide not to get a copy of it. And what I recommended is that's not what we need to do. We need to ask the seller if they want to get a copy of it or not. Because if the seller gets a copy or the agent gets a copy, then we have the obligation to disclose. Okay. So I didn't want the agent to make this decision on their own. They needed to make it with the seller. The seller decided not to get a copy of the home inspection and therefore did not have the obligation to disclose, since they weren't presented with any of the details of the home inspection. But we've had it happen before where the listing agent and the buyer's agent were the same person. And the buyer got a home inspection, and the buyer basically backed out of the deal as a result of the home inspection. And now our buyer's agent is in possession of the report. Well, the buyer's agent is also the listing agent. So the seller said, I don't want to see it, and we're not disclosing anything that's in that report. Well, we have to, because the same agent is on both sides of the deal and has knowledge of this report. So I basically told the agent that in that particular case, they have to give up the listing because they can't be in possession of that report and not disclose it. And the seller refused to let us disclose the report. So just wanted to point that out, that those are some scenarios that are happening within the industry.
So we come down to the individual inspections that you can elect or waive. We have the home inspections, right? An environmental hazard. We have the wood inspection, deed restrictions and zoning, water service, radon. By the way, has anybody had a radon system done recently? Okay. I think they're still right around $1,200 to $1,500 for a system if they have to vent it and cut a hole in the ground.
I think Tom Chladnick just had one done, or somebody did, I think. Is he on the call?
That's right, Tom.
Yeah, I had two of them done. If you're just getting a fan put in, they seem to be around $800. But if you're going a whole system to the outside, they're around the 1,200, 11 to $1,300, something like that.
Okay. And if you only need the fan, that means you have a passive already.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So radon, on-lot sewage, septic, property and flood insurance, property boundaries, lead-based paint, and then other, which is a kind of blank there. Okay. Part D here, notices regarding property and environmental inspections. Paragraph 1, exterior building materials. Poor or improper installation of exterior building materials may result in moisture penetrating the surface of a structure where it may cause mold and damage to the building's frame. That's your stucco, that fake stuff, right? We've had that happen before, right, Tim?
Mm-hmm.
Asbestos. Asbestos is linked with several adverse health effects, including various forms of cancer. We just had one we've dealt with recently. It was a rehabbed house, completely rehabbed, and the basement had asbestos tile, or once did, and whoever flipped the house took out all those tiles except for a small corner of one, which the buyer, after a month in the house, took it to a lab and got it tested, and it did test for asbestos. And short of it, we came to find out that there is an actual law that states that any house renovator has to abide by removal process. If they can't prove it, they're still liable. So in the beginning, the seller for this deal stood steadfast. Hey, you bought the house without an inspection, but then the buyer and I found a law, an actual federal law that states that they have to abide by standards to remove this asbestos. And when we presented that, they wrote a check the next day for this buyer. So if you have a house renovator, just be careful with this. And one really good way to identify asbestos tile that I found out through this process is, the home is built prior to like this the 50s, and the tile is like 9 inches by 9 inches.
How much was the check, Kong?
$4,300.
And what did that cover?
His remediation. He had the house remediated.
Basically, they have to bring in a fan system and suck out all the particles in the home. They pretty much come in suits and stuff and set it all up and then run these fans and suck out all the fibers.
Yeah, I actually just stood outside and watched them do it. And it was pretty elaborate. So yeah. It was actually $6,000, but he agreed to 4,300. So environmental hazards, the EPA has a list of hazardous substances, the use and disposal of which are restricted by law. Generally, if hazardous substances are found on a property, it is the property owner's responsibility to dispose of them properly. Wetlands. Wetlands are protected by the federal and state governments. Buyer may wish to hire an environmental engineer to investigate whether the property is located in wetlands to determine if permits for plans to build, improve, or develop the property would be affected or denied because of its location in the wetlands area. Mold, fungi, and indoor quality, air quality, indoor mold contamination, and the inhalation of bioaerosols, bacteria, mold, spores, pollens, and viruses have been associated with allergic responses. And then any additional info, you can call the state or federal. Okay.
I have a question if I could quick.
Yeah, Jim.
Yeah, has anyone had experience in the office with lead remediation? I have a good friend that has rental properties in Harrisburg, and he got a fine on that. I think to remediate it cost him something in the neighborhood of $16,000.
I haven't had any lead-based paint or are you talking about lead in the plumbing or lead-based paint?
I think it was paint, Tim. The tenant had a kid, and I don't know if they ingested it or what the situation was, but I know it cost him a lot of money to get it taken care of.
Yeah, I haven't. I mean, I've heard from other people, professionals that say one of the best and cheapest ways is just encapsulate it, which is paint over it, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I can just tell you, Jim, Poppy and I had a deal like that in Lemoyne years ago. Our seller was an attorney, and the people went and they had a home inspection, and the home inspector said, "Well, I don't know if it's lead-based paint or not. It's an older home, but you might want to have it checked if you have little kids." Well, they got the buyer all up in arms about it. So they came back with a reply to inspection, wanted to check it, and our seller said, "No, we're not doing it." You know, we would rather lose the deal and find another buyer than expose ourselves to the possibility of whether there is or there is not lead-based paint. Now, you know, years ago, if you painted over top of lead-based paint, then you probably are not going to have a problem. But I'm not an expert in that, and I don't know what determines whether or not there's a problem or not a problem. But
Sure.
you know, our seller, who was an attorney, elected to roll the dice and say, "Nope, I'd rather lose the deal and sell it to somebody else." And it all worked out, and we didn't have an inspection. But you know, we did not want to get involved in a lead-based paint inspection.
Yeah. That's interesting. Thank you.
Yep.
So that leads us to paragraph 13, the actual inspection contingency. Okay. Paragraph A, the contingency period is 10 days if you don't fill anything in from the execution date of this agreement for each inspection elected in paragraph 12C. So it's for 10 days, okay, if not specified. So within the stated contingency period, okay, so within the 10 days, and as the result of any inspection elected in paragraph 12C, except as stated in paragraph 13C, if the results of the inspections elected in paragraph 12C are satisfactory to buyer, buyer will present all reports in their entirety to seller, accept the property with the information stated in the report, and agree to the release in paragraph 28 of this agreement. Okay, so number one is they are okay with everything and they're just going to move along. It's kind of interesting that it says that they will present all reports in their entirety to the seller, even if it's okay. But it's there. Two, if the results of any inspection elected in paragraph 12C are unsatisfactory to buyer, buyer will present all reports in their entirety to the seller and terminate this agreement by written notice to seller with all deposit monies returned to buyer according to the agreement of sale, terms of paragraph 26 of this agreement. So number two is they're terminating because they didn't like the report. Okay. Three, if the result of any inspection elected in paragraph 12C are unsatisfactory to buyer, buyer will present all reports in their entirety to seller with a written corrective proposal listing corrections and or credits desired by buyer. So again, all three of these actions have to happen within subparagraph A, whatever you have there, which is 10 days. The proposal may, but is not required, to include the names of a properly licensed or qualified professional to perform the corrections requested in the proposal, provisions for payments, including retests, and a projected date for completion of the corrections. Buyer agrees that seller will not be held liable for corrections that do not comply with mortgage lender or government requirements if performed in a workmanlike manner according to the terms of buyer's proposal.
So, Kong, we just had a situation, and I want to talk to you about it, where as part of the reply to inspection proposal and the change in terms agreement, it was indicated that the seller at the seller's expense will have a radon test done and bring it to a level of below 4 picocuries per liter prior to settlement. So the buyer hired the radon company, did the radon test. The seller agreed to it. This buyer then hired the company that gave the estimate was, I think, the same company that the buyer had originally chosen and used. So everything was from the buyer's company. Well, the test came in at 4.3, and it was done at the kind of at the last minute, and it was not able to be brought to under 4.0 prior to settlement. The buyer walked away from the deal. We didn't comply. We weren't able to get it below 4.0 prior to settlement. Now, the vendor said they can get it to 4.0 or under. It probably would require another suction point, but it didn't happen before settlement. So are buyers allowed to walk away when they chose the vendor and it wasn't done timely? And this is my point, that if we're going to have contingencies like this, we've got to make sure that we get these things done in a timely manner and not wait to the last minute, so that if the test results come in and it isn't acceptable, that we have time to get it acceptable. What are your thoughts, Brooks and Kong, on that, as far as 4.3 versus 4 or under?
You want to go first, Brooks?
Sure. So I guess it really depends on how that change in terms addendum is worded. And if it was supposed to be prior to settlement, if that's the case, it certainly would give them, in my opinion, a means of getting out, because that is a contractual default on the seller's end if they agreed to getting that below. the necessary level. Now, I've had experience with different radon removal companies, and they're not all created equal, in my opinion. You know, there's certain companies out there that are wizards at getting rid of that sort of stuff. I've had companies come in, put in 5 different suction points, and it's still not getting it below the level. And I had to contract another company. I can't say enough good things about Bass Air Quality's systems. Jewett is amazing with remediating radon. He came in and he's like, you could add 15 more suction points to this given property where they were doing it, and it wouldn't take care of the issue because the radon was actually coming through under the garage slab. So as soon as he put his suction point in under the garage slab, it was gone like that. He is one of the few that I know of that like guarantees his results. So, you know, if he gives you a quote, you're not subject to additional suction points to get you below that threshold. A lot of them in their contracts say, you know, this is the price, but it may require additional suction points, and those are going to be X $500 additional suction point, for example. But Jewett again kind of guarantees those results for his price. And, you know, I think it pays dividends to work with somebody who's an absolute expert in that. And it helps you meet those timelines to keep you in compliance with what you agreed contractually.
Line 6 and 7 there said that prior to settlement, if not specified. Well, you know, in this particular case, it was not that the radon company wouldn't continue to work on it to get it below the 4.3. It was we didn't have it done prior to settlement. And this is one of the things that the buyer was looking for as a way to get out of the contract and try to get their money back.
Sure. Yeah, it doesn't seem like that was the sole issue in this case, if I had to guess. They were doing that as a means of getting out of the deal
Oh, yeah.
because obviously they could have put it in the walkthrough, you know, and had the contractor come back and solve the issue. It's not an unsolvable issue, but it was a contractual loophole that they exploited.
Right. Kong, are you in the same agreement on that?
Well, here's my thinking on it. I always, whenever I say you write up a termination, especially specifically for the buyer, you always want to identify clearly a provision in the contract that says buyer may terminate and get their deposit money back, right? You always want that to cite that specific paragraph that says that, okay? If you cite something else and it doesn't say that, then to me, the buyer doesn't really have a right to terminate. So again, here it says seller, this is the change in terms form, okay? And it says seller at seller's expense will complete the following repairs no later than blank days prior to settlement, in a workmanlike manner, with all required permits according to the attached contractor's proposal, if any, the terms of which, including the persons and specifications contained therein, shall become part of this agreement. Okay? But it doesn't say if it's not completed before that date, the buyer can terminate and get their deposit money back. And actually, if you look at the guidelines for it, the guidelines for this change in terms, this is paragraph 1, repairs, right? If the seller agrees to make repairs or improvements to the property, whether as a result of inspection negotiations or otherwise, provide a number of days prior to the settlement date that the seller should have the work completed. Note, be sure to leave enough time before the settlement date for any follow-up inspections that may be required by municipality, lender, or insurer. If the settlement date will have to be rescheduled, you can use this form for that purpose as well. On the blank lines, describe the work that the seller will do specifically as possible. The parties may attach a contractor's proposal. So that's really all it says in the guideline is it doesn't talk about buyers can terminate, right? And then I
Did
thought about
they,
this. I thought about this a little more too. So the buyer, when they did the inspection, right, said to the seller that, hey, a system failed within the property, right?
Okay.
So the radon failed. So a system failed. So to me, it almost goes back to paragraph 18, maintenance and risk of loss. They agreed that they were going to get it fixed, but it hasn't been fixed yet. So they can still credit the buyer or do something to make it right.
was that a system that was already in place, or was that one that
No,
they
it,
were completely adding?
it was a new system, but there was all kinds of other crazy stuff that was going on in that deal too, where we had a challenging agent, not our agent was great, but we had a challenging agent where the they kept sending documents in counterpart with the signatures. So they would send a page of what the buyer agreed to, like with the change in terms, there's a page one and a page two. And they would send the one page, but not the other page. And then they said, well, we already signed the other page on a previous, um, the initial change in terms, which wasn't agreed to. So then there was a counter offer, but it was just, we were having a difficult time with this other agent, the whole way through this deal. But I know in the contract and attorneys, a lot of times signatures in counterpart are acceptable, but it's not a real great way of doing it because it's you're piecing the contract together, trying to say, oh yeah, that this came in on this date, this came in on this date, but it just would be nice if some of these agents would cooperate with us as we're trying to do it right, um, and they make it very difficult and challenging.
Sure.
I just don't think and to me, this is one where you almost have to show up at the settlement table and hash this out and either settle or not settle.
Yeah, and
Well,
to clarify,
the buyer terminated because we couldn't do it in time.
The day before settlement.
Yeah, I think it was the day before settlement they terminated. But if they terminated the day before settlement, not the day of settlement, they don't actually know whether or not we got it remediated or not remediated.
Correct.
So there could be some strong. Right now, the deal's obviously terminated. The property's back on the market. But right now, the fight now will be over. I think it's
the
a
EMD.
$20,000 deposit. But I think we have some, based on what you're saying, Kong. I think we have some positions to stand on for our seller to at least get part of the deposit.
I think there's a lot of reasons, but when you go to mediation, what do?
You're going to
Tell you
walk
to
away with half a smile.
split the baby.
Yeah. Well, that's
Yeah.
Which is fine,
I
right?
think our seller would be
Yeah.
satisfied with getting half, as a result of the inconvenience and what they've been put through on this transaction. But
May I tell you what I would do if I was the buyer agent in this case? If this
that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
was holding them back, I would have called my lender and said, hey, this house was supposed to have a remediated radon and it hasn't. I need a letter that says you can't give me a mortgage.
Now, the other question we have, which Kong, I'm going to talk to you a little later on about this, is maybe if you could catch up with JB, either you or Aaron, and find out whether or not does the buyer have the right to put a less pendants against this house if the seller refuses to return the EMD?
Well, a les pendants is really just if they still want to buy the house, they have to want to buy the house. I think that's
Okay.
a component of it, isn't it? Like,
I'm not sure, but
If
that's
they want to
something
buy the house, they're still up. They can buy it.
right. They're the ones that terminated it.
Right.
I think a Liz pendens though, Tim, I think you might be on the right because it's just a notification of a case pending. It's not
Right.
saying that they want the house. It's just that there's a dispute. Uh, um, but we'll have to ask JB for sure, but the dispute isn't specific to it's not going to become a lien on a property, so I don't think it would matter either way. But a Liz pendens is just letting everybody know, hey, there's some sort of issue going on here that is related to the property, but I don't think it couldn't be a lienable property because the money's being held in escrow.
Yeah, and like for 40 years, I've only ever seen or heard of maybe two people that have done that.
Yeah.
And I don't know the particulars on why it was done or how it was done. But when the agent asked me, can they put a less pendants on there? I'm like, I don't know. Because we've all practiced under the sense that, look, once it's terminated, we have the right to put it back on the market and sell it to somebody else. Now all we got to do is fight over the deposit, which is part two. That's why there's two sections, the termination and the return of the money. And, I just didn't know the answer to that one. And that's why I would like to see if we could check that out with JB.
Yeah, sure. I'll talk to him later.
Yep. All right, go ahead. Sorry about that, guys.
That's all right. Let me go back to the inspections portion. So we have 10 days to do the inspections, right? If nothing else is written or changed, 10 days for your inspections and a reply back to the seller with what you want to do. Terminate, negotiate, or accept.
Now, if you let me just jump in on that too. That's fine under normal inspections and normal conditions. But when we're dealing with this type of timeline or a season, like January and February, when the ground's frozen and you can't do certain inspections because of weather, we've got to be cognizant that as a buyer's agent, when we're writing this up, you better put in a little bit longer time frame or some, contingencies for that, because the seller does not have to give you more time.
Yep. Especially with like water tests and septic tests, right?
And that's the two that I'm worried about. You know, the water tests seem to always take a little bit longer than the 10 days, and the septic tests are like next to impossible to try to go get a septic inspection done if it's pouring down rain for the next week or it's frozen, you know.
So if you go down the route of negotiating the home inspection or any of the inspections um, that was done by the buyer, then there are provisions within this contract that states how that negotiation goes. So the next phase of it is A, following the end of the contingency period, buyer and seller will have 5 days for a negotiation period. During the negotiation period, one, seller will acknowledge in writing seller's agreement to satisfy all the terms of buyer's proposal. Or two, buyer and seller will negotiate another mutually acceptable written agreement providing for any repairs or improvements to the property and or any credit to buyer at settlement as acceptable to the mortgage lender, if any. So during the 5 days, you're negotiating, right? And one thing that I think I mentioned the last time we went over this was during this 5 days, nobody can terminate this deal. So the buyer cannot terminate during this 5 day period. Okay.
So basically what you're saying is you either have to come to an agreement or not come to an agreement within that 5 days. And you have to wait till the sixth day to terminate if you're the buyer, if you and the seller have not come to an agreement. So you can walk away and terminate during the inspection period, right? But you can't walk away or terminate within the 5 days of the reply to inspection period.
Right. during the negotiation period, you can't have that, mentality that you're gonna just terminate during that 5 days. It
Okay.
doesn't work that way. Now, subparagraph lowercase b, if no mutually acceptable written agreement is reached, or if seller fails to respond during the negotiation period within blank days, 2 if not specified, following the end of the negotiation period, the 5 days, buyer will 1, accept the property, or 2, terminate. So now they have only 2 choices. Can't negotiate further. You can only accept or terminate. Okay, so then again, that's then where you would cite if you were terminating, because you and the seller could not come to an agreement after 15 days, right? 10 and 5. That's where you would cite, hey, we couldn't come to an agreement during this time frame. Okay.
Yep.
Any questions?
With it being almost an hour, I think maybe we ought to continue this whole subject and topic that we were going to go through next week. If there's no questions at this point, because with this, we could literally go on for another hour. Yeah. Anybody have anything they want to bring up or add to the conversation at this point? And we'll do a part 2 to this next week. Even if you disagree with anything that Brooks, Kong, or I said, because to be honest, we're all just trying to work through and think through these scenarios. So anybody have anything they want to bring up or a situation they've had recently? Nope. All right, Brooks, go ahead.
Yeah, one quick thing I want to, just chime in and make sure everybody keeps in mind. Kong brought up a good point with this buyer in this case we were talking about issued apparently a termination. You guys got to make sure that the buyer has a legitimate means to terminate a contract. It sounds like in this scenario, he didn't have means of terminating contractually. So, if you're the buyer in that, representing the buyer in that scenario, you could either talk to the lender like Kong said, or simply you got to go to settlement and demand proof that the seller fulfilled their part of their contractual obligations, which is getting the rate on below that acceptable level. Then you can argue that the seller's in default if they can't do that the day of settlement, which would give you means of getting your deposit back. But wrongfully terminating does put that EMD at risk. So just keep in mind what you're doing with these terminations, and how you use them, because there's liability in doing that.
And Kong, I'm glad you brought up about that, doing that. Again, we're just talking about in general, but that 5-day negotiation period, I forgot that the buyer can't walk away at that point in time from that. It's a very interesting point that we've got to remember, that we got to wait till day 6 or 7 to do that.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Anybody else have anything they'd like to bring up or add to the conversation, or a crazy scenario that we'd want to try to think through at this point? If not, let's pick up on part 2 of this, Brooks and Kong, next week, because again, I think this is one of these subjects where we could continue to go on, and maybe Aaron and Kong, you can find out a little information from JB with regards to the Les Pendants situation, so that we can add to the conversation next week with that. All right.
Thank you.
Other than that, guys, we'll talk to you later, and have a great day.